Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Who would do well, John, out of the EU elections if we were to fight them?
Well, there's a general characteristic of European Parliament elections. The first is that voters are more likely to vote for smaller parties. Remember someone like Caroline Lucas, for example, first managed to get elected via European Parliament elections. The second is that the issue of Europe tends to be more important, even without the choreography of the argument that's been going on outside it. And you can already see this. We've actually already had an opinion poll done by Opinion asking people how they would vote in the European Parliament elections. And the answer is that both Conservative and Labour are down from their current general election voting intention, which we should come back to in a moment, with around 18% of people saying they vote UKIP, which is around twice the level that UKIP are at the moment. The Greens, again, around 7-8%. So the honest truth is that, yes, the European Parliament elections have long been difficult for the Conservative and Labour parties. Don't be surprised that they do not wish to revisit the experience. But I think the honest truth is the European Union has worked out that giving us the right to extend beyond the 12th of April without insisting on European Parliament elections is too risky from their point of view, because the honest truth is that whatever assurances the Prime Minister gives them about her ability to get this through before the 30th of June, I think, frankly, they will say this is far too much of a risk, because we're really not sure that this House of Commons is going to get the withdrawal treaty through in time to avoid us having to have representation inside the European Parliament.
Does everybody think we will actually fight these EU elections? Do you think it will actually happen?
I think it's likely, given what we've seen so far. I mean, one hopes that the withdrawal agreement will pass or will leave with no deal, but I think it's more likely that we will contest these elections.
Mariana, what do you think about the prospect of the UK fighting these EU elections?
Well, what would be interesting is under what platform. It seems like we haven't talked about anything but Brexit. And again, if you come back to the key economic problems of this country, we should actually be talking about, if we do have the elections, what are the different parties going to be sort of, arguing for? What kind of Europe? What kind of investment-led growth? This country, by the way, continues to grow through consumption-led growth. So the level of private debt to disposable income is back to what it was just before the financial crisis, which means we might be having another large financial crisis. That's the big picture instead of this kind of, infighting. And there's no platform, there's no real debate in this country about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the honest truth is, Mariana, is that Brexit is dominating everything. But then
a very sick economy. Very, very sick
we'll come on to whether the economy is sick, of course.
There are arguments about that, and I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to argue about it. I mean, but the other thing what you realise going on, and this kind of takes us back to the by-election last night, that what now seems to be fairly clearly is happening is that, leaving aside the fact that European Parliament elections are not a very good context for Conservative Labour in the first place, it's now beginning to look quite clear that the argument about Brexit is eroding support for both Conservative and Labour. And that process of the consolidation of our politics in 2017 behind Conservative and Labour, where both parties got a higher share of the vote together than at any point since 1970, that process looks as being reversed. We saw in Newport a 20-point drop in their combined share. And now there's an opinion poll out this morning from YouGov that has the combined share for Conservative and Labour down to 63%, with 25% of those people who voted Leave saying they'd either vote for UKIP or for Brexit. So one can now see the fragmentation of our party system back again as Leave voters who have voted Conservative are go back towards UKIP, etc. But equally, Labour also are gradually losing support to the Liberal Democrats, to the Greens, and frankly, north of the border are not taking anything off the SNP.
Right, and we're going to show that some of the figures that you have been talking about as a result of Newport West. Just before we move on, how will you vote in the EU elections if the UK fights them?
Vote, I might even stand. There was a story in the
for
the Brexit Party, if they'll have me. There was a story in the Daily Telegraph today pointing out the extraordinary, lavish gravy train that is the European Parliament. You get paid a basic salary
of
£86,000. No, I give the money to charity, but it's
Nigel Farage has done quite well out of it.
They never examine your expenses. You get 3 offices. You don't have to work on a Friday, and you get taxed at 12%.
Well, OK, so you've just done a good PR move for standing.
This is ridiculous that people can even still say this. Brexit is costing this country billions in legal fees. The 4 consulting companies are making massive profits. We are losing huge amounts of investment. $7 billion is what the UK received from the European Investment Bank in 2016, $5 billion from the Horizon programme. When we hear this, it has to be contested. These are lies that continue to be repeated.
It has to be. What's a lie?
that somehow
You
the
get
European
£86,000
Union is
a year if
cost.
you're an MEP.
If you divide by GDP, Europe does not cost each country very much. And what it provides, also in terms of having fought for working regulations, environmental regulations, which have only brought this country into a better place.
I wasn't making any
research
claim. I wasn't
funding,
making any claims about
infrastructure
that. I was
funding.
merely pointing out
that is
that
money coming into the country.
You did say it was a gravy train.
The European Parliament,
but
if you're an
how
MEP,
Brexit
is a gravy
happened.
train.
Let's move
There's
on.
no regulation of your expenses. You don't have to work on Fridays. You get 3 offices. You get £250,000 to pay for your office expenses. I mean, it's extraordinary. And none of this is properly invigilated, even though it's a bureaucratic
You may find that if you stand, they might change the rules, and so it could backfire on you quite badly, too.
I will give the money to charity, Joe.
Right. Are you talking to the Brexit Party?
No.
Are you going to?
Well, if they call me, I'll talk to them, yes. I think one of the features of this, if we do participate, God forbid, in the forthcoming European elections, is there going to be a lot of non-political candidates standing.
Another one of the features will be that if UK MEPs are elected, they will have a say in constituting the European Commission and all of the key senior individuals who are involved in the political process of the negotiations. So it would be a pretty extraordinary situation for the UK to be involved in making decisions in a parliament where it could leave imminently, according to Theresa May's plan.
But isn't the honest truth, isn't the thing that we've learned in the last 72 hours that both sides have blinked? At the end of the day, the difficulties that us crashing out with a deal would cause on the island of Ireland means at the end of the day, the European Union is concerned that the integrity of the single market would be compromised by an open border when there isn't a deal. But equally also, as it frankly has long been evident inside the UK House of Commons, there isn't a majority for no deal inside the House of Commons. So both sides have realised that actually whatever they would prefer, they both have to avoid no deal, which is why at the end of the day, the European Union is going to probably play this game very long in the hope that over 12 months we can eventually reach some kind of accommodation which may or may not changing our minds. But equally also on the UK side, there just isn't any willingness to go down the no-deal path.
Well, interestingly, in response to Jacob Rees-Mogg's tweet earlier, and to some extent what you're saying, Guy Verhofstadt, leading player in the European Parliament, has tweeted, "For those in the EU who may be tempted to further extend the hashtag Brexit saga, I can only say, be careful what you wish for." What do you think he is thinking at this point?
Well, there has to be this kind of exchange of rhetoric, doesn't there, in response to that tweet. I think the big question really at European Council is where does Emmanuel Macron go? Does he insist absolutely that the UK must now go? That discussion between Macron and Merkel will be massively important. There was the sense that the European Union were going to give Theresa May one short extension, and that was going to be the last chance. If there is a long extension rather than another short extension, what does it say about the possibility for future member states who might want to depart?
All right, we've been talking about the EU elections, but John has also been talking about the result of the Newport West by-election and what it says about the state of the parties. Let's just show the results. I know, John, that you have sort of taken us through it. But in terms of the fact that the vote share was down for the two main parties and up a little bit for the small parties, what did it tell us, if anything, about appetite for a second referendum?
Oh, frankly, nothing
Right.
in terms of whether or not the people want a second referendum. What it indicated, what it does indicate. I mean, no by-election should be interpreted too closely on its own. What's interesting about the pattern in Newport West is that it is consistent with the expectations one might have had given what the national opinion polls have been saying recently, which is a decline in the combined level of support for Conservative and Labour, with UKIP back to roughly the level that they were before the 2017
But
election.
a small swing from Labour to the Tories, wasn't there?
Frankly,
irrelevant?
that is irrelevant.
All right.
Both parties are down, and both parties are losing ground in the wake of the Brexit saga. The Conservatives are particularly clearly losing support amongst their Leave voters, and it's going towards UKIP. Newport West is consistent with that story in the polls, and equally the Labour Party is also losing ground, probably more amongst its Remain supporters. And the fact that there were 4 parties in Newport West fighting on a pro-second referendum reverse result position. Liberal Democrats, Plaid, the so-called Renew Party and the Greens. Collectively, their vote was up by 11 percentage points. So I don't think it tells us anything about, whether or not, what the people want a referendum, but certainly it indicates how potentially parties on that side of the spectrum are also beginning to be able to gain ground. But of course, this was a by-election in which perhaps the two interesting players on the fringes of British politics weren't present, viz. Nigel Farage's Brexit Party and Change UK. Now, what we will be at when they're competing is, we may have to wait till May the 23rd.
All right, well, look, let's hear from victorious Ruth Jones, who won last night for Labour. Here she is.
There is a level of distrust of all politicians at the moment because of what's been going on in the House of Commons. And I think that highlighted itself in the relatively low turnout tonight. So it's important that I want to work together with the people who did elect me, of course, but I want to reach out to those people who didn't go out to vote today to make sure that we get their voices heard and they get re-engaged with politics again.
Heather, is trust in politicians at an all-time low?
I don't know if it's an all-time low, but you certainly feel that, don't you, right? And the message seems to be, why can't you just sort it out? And, I have no doubt that another extension will just send that absolutely the same message. And people, there's no sign with our readership that people aren't gripped by this issue. You can see that with the numbers that these stories grip, but I think they're sort of gripped and somehow horrified by these late night votes and MPs being tied and the whole thing being, complicated.
The issue is not trust. The issue is competence. All right. We're now getting figures. I had research published out, which is based on data collected in January, February. Over 80% of people thinking the government had handled Brexit badly, including above all Leave voters. YouGov are now more recently publishing figures with 88% of people saying the government has handled Brexit badly. But equally, Opinium have been tracking people's views of how well or badly Jeremy Corbyn has responded to Brexit, and his numbers have also becoming more negative. So the honest truth is that the large sections of the public frankly think that both the government and the opposition have handled Brexit badly. So this is not an issue of trust in the sense of, do we trust these guys to do what they say they would do? This is a question of whether these guys are actually capable of delivering. And it is, as a result, it is damaging both of our principal political parties.
Can I ask you a question, John, which is that one of the reasons people are sceptical that Jeremy Corbyn will come to some kind of Good Friday agreement today with Theresa May is the belief that if we do leave with a deal, even if it includes some commitment to remaining in the customs union, it will give an electoral benefit to the Tories and Labour will pay an electoral price. Is that borne out in the polls?
Well, clearly the risk that Jeremy Corbyn is facing in coming to any agreement is that is whether he can bring his party with him. If he comes to an agreement that doesn't involve having a second referendum, he's going to have an enormous row.
Which he doesn't want.
And there will be a major split inside the Labour Party. But equally, if he does insist on a second referendum, there will be a split inside the Labour Party. You have to remember it's not just Theresa May that has trouble bringing her MPs with her. So frankly also is Jeremy Corbyn. Now, and the difficulty that Theresa May has called for Jeremy Corbyn is until now, as the opposition, the Labour Party have been able to succeed in avoiding coming to too much in the way of a decision. But insofar as Labour are under pressure now to declare their hand, it's more difficult. So that's one reason why certainly the Labour Party will be reluctant to come to an agreement. The second is indeed, of course, they don't necessarily want to be associated with the delivery of Brexit, which they will still regard as a Tory Brexit. And yes, sure, who in the end of the day is likely to profit if indeed the deal does manage to go through? Well, much more likely the Conservative Party.
Coming back to the question